From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
It's difficult to imagine a time when airport security wasn't what it is today. That pre-9/11 era where you could walk right up to the gate and wave goodbye to loved ones, or just give the person at the ticket counter any old name to put on your ticket. But this was the case back in 1971, when a mysterious man going by the name Dan Cooper approached the counter of Northwest Orient Airlines in Portland, Oregon, and using cash, purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington. This would set off a chain of events that would result in the only unsolved case of air piracy in U.S. history. The mysterious man that went by the alias of Dan Cooper would disappear into the night, along with $200,000 in ransom money, never to be seen again. This week, I welcome my guest, author and researcher, Tom Sullivan, to talk about his book, Escape at 10,000 Feet, D.B. Cooper and the Missing Money. Welcome to From the Void. All right, Tom Sullivan, thank you so much for spending some time with me on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell people a little bit about your background and how you got interested in the topic of D.B. Cooper.
Yeah, so I am an author-illustrator. I've written and illustrated 3 different picture books for children, and I was kind of looking for my next idea, and I originally actually pitched this book as a picture book, but my agent and I kind of realized, like, this is way too big to be like a 32-page picture book. Also, the subject matter is a little more mature than the picture book audience. So my agent, Steve Mock, was actually the one that came up with the idea that I should just kind of expand it into just this much larger format than we had been used to working in. And it was just awesome. Like, I loved working on this book, and it's just kind of opened my eyes to just different kind of books to make going forward.
Yeah, it's one of those really interesting topics out there. I would say up there with like the escape from Alcatraz and stuff like that, because we live in a world now with technology where there just aren't that many unsolved mysteries like this anymore. So,
no, not at all, right?
Yeah, so tell people a little bit, set the background first of all, because one of the interesting aspects of this case, this mystery, is the fact that there's no way anyone could pull this off now based on current airport protocol. So when did this take place, and kind of what were the airport protocols at that point that allowed this guy to get on this plane?
1971. It's pretty much like if you walked into an airport, you could bring and do just about anything you wanted. There was no metal detectors, no real passenger screenings. You didn't need an ID to buy a ticket. This guy bought his ticket with $20 cash. So just untraceable. You could give them any name you wanted. He chose Dan Cooper. Who knows why? We'll never really know the answer to that. But yeah, I mean, this case, it actually changed airport security as we know it. They implemented metal detectors and screenings. The Boeing 727 had to be modified because they realized, oh geez, like, a hijacker could just open up this door mid-flight. And, it really is just like this fascinating case because it reads so much like a pulpy story from the 70s, just hijacking, getting the cash and parachutes, and it's like something out of a movie. Stranger than fiction, like to a T.
Yeah. So talk about what airport did he board this flight, and where was he going?
So he went into the Portland International Airport, Portland, Oregon, and he was headed to Seattle, Washington, which sounds like I've never flown that route, but it sounds like it's a commuter route, like a 30-minute flight. just there and back, and something like around here, Boston to New York. People fly Boston to New York all the time, and it's like you kind of blink through it. Yeah, I think. Are you still there? It looks like we might have lost you on my end. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So he gets on this plane, and he's definitely got a very specific description based on the witnesses. So what does he dress like, and how is he acting when he first gets on board?
Yeah, so very casual, black suit, black overcoat, brown loafers, briefcase. Like, looks like a businessman just going up to Seattle to do whatever he has to do. Gets on board, hands the flight attendant a note informing her that he has a set of demands and that he would like her to sit next to him and that he has a bomb. He tells her what he wants, and then he puts on sunglasses. So she's really kind of one of the only people that got like a look at his face for any sort of prolonged period of time. Like, if you're on an airplane, people walk by you all the time. I don't know how much you pay attention or what you might recognize about somebody. So it's really just very interesting, how he did this. Like, it's like, what's the motivation behind something like that? Because it's such a daring and ballsy move to jump out of an airplane with $200,000 worth of cash and hope that you're just going to land and go back about your day,
Yeah, and it's not as if he's jumping out of, like the typical airplane that we see when people are doing skydives.
Yeah,
he's jumping out of a commercial aircraft.
Yeah, commercial aircraft going at, pretty high speeds, 10,000 feet, which I guess is, I don't know too much about actual skydiving. I've never done it. But, typically a commercial flight is at 30,000 feet. So that would have been a pretty insane jump. But 10,000 feet sounds like it's more manageable, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. So he gives this note over and says, he's got I think he says he has a bomb, right? And that he has this list of demands. So he demands two things, right? He demands, as you said, $200,000 in cash, which is like somewhere in the range of, I think, 1.2 or 1.3 million today.
Yeah.
Based off of inflation. And he demands parachutes, but he demands 4 parachutes. Like, what's the motivation behind that? Like, he's one guy, right?
Yeah.
You should only need 1 parachute. So
I guess
in your research,
what he was thinking there. So 2 front, 2 back. A front parachute sounds like it's a reserve chute, like you would use it in an emergency, and the back parachute's the big backpack. Why 4? In case maybe that he thought they were tampered with and he was going to inspect them, or if he knew that he just wanted to utilize some of the nylon cord from one of them. Or it could have just been as simple as, like making sure that they're paying attention and listening to him and following his demands. Kind of like, there's this story back in the day, I think it was Led Zeppelin or something, on one of their riders had the no brown M&Ms. And it wasn't that they cared about brown M&Ms. It was like, if they put this small detail on their tour rider and they go to the arena and they have no brown M&Ms, then I'm sure all the electrical and the lighting and the sound equipment is working as well. So it's just kind of like a little trick to make sure people are paying attention.
Yeah, interesting. The other weird or kind of fascinating thing about his demand for parachutes is that initially, I believe they offer him kind of military grade parachutes, and he's like, "No, I want."
Yeah. So he thought that was probably tampered with, I think, and then requested them from the nearby skydiving school.
Interesting.
But there, there's a lot of there's some gray areas with those parachutes. Like, why did he choose those particular parachutes? If he was experienced, I read somewhere that one of the reserve chutes had a big X on it, and that meant that it was just like a dummy, like it was there to show you what the chute looked like, and they kind of threw that in the pack of 4, and he didn't know. And then the back parachute, the MB-8, you didn't have the ability to steer that chute. So if you jumped out of an airplane, you see skydivers, they're pulling on their 2 levers and the maneuvering, and I think with the MB-8, you're kind of just at the mercy of the wind. But they would use that in ejections. So, other people say that the NBA would have been the better parachute because 10,000 feet, it's dark after 8 o'clock at night. You just kind of let the wind take you, and that'll be better than trying to steer your way towards. I mean, you're in the middle of nowhere where he jumped, so I don't even know what you would be steering yourself towards if you jumped there.
Yeah, and that's something that's become problematic for people attempting to figure out if this guy actually survived the landing and where he landed, because the search parameters, like they really have a huge range.
Oh yeah.
To search, right? And
it's like a lot of just like they're like logging roads, but a lot of just kind of empty forest, And I know people have gone up there searching, and someone found a chute a few years ago that was around the same era, and it was like, oh no, that's just this missing skydiver that no one else found. So stuff just kind of is sitting out there waiting to be found. It's just a matter of going out there and actually locating it.
Yeah, so talk about that as that part of the trip. So he hijacks this plane. He gives very specific directions and instructions to the pilots. He's flying, as you said, they kind of lowered the plane down to a lower altitude. Mm-hmm. So he appeared as if he had a particular spot where he knew he was going to jump. Like, this obviously was very premeditated. So where does he jump? And as you mentioned, the other part of it was that kind of created some additional risk. This is at nighttime. This is in the dark.
Oh, yeah. At night. So his original plan was to go to Mexico City, like every criminal on the West Coast, get to Mexico. But the pilots, informed him, like, they don't have enough fuel to go Seattle to Mexico. You probably need a bigger plane than the Boeing 727. So they come up with this compromise to land and refuel in Reno. And he probably figured the feds are going to be waiting in Reno. He already got out of Seattle unscathed. Like, the likelihood of him landing and refueling in Reno without, a SWAT team boarding the plane or anything like that was highly unlikely, I think he figured. So he just jumped, I think it was around 30 minutes after they left Seattle. He just kind of hopped out. I don't know if it was calculated or if it was like, okay, I think I'm far enough away. Let's see what happens.
And there does seem to be some indication that he had some familiarity with airplanes, because there's at one point it sounds like he gets into this kind of debate with the hostage negotiators, or the airlines at the very least, in terms of, like, because he tells them, I think he gives them instructions, right, to keep the back of the airplane open, the back, the aft door or whatever, and keep the staircase down so that he can jump. And they keep saying it's not safe, and he's like, yes, it is.
Yeah. So he wanted to lower it. He wanted to have the flight attendant lower it, like, mid-flight, I think. And they were like, no way. She was afraid of getting sucked out of the plane like you see in movies and stuff. So they compromised and had it so that they lowered the door right before takeoff. So he took off with the door open and the stairs down. And then the flight attendant, she got into the cockpit, and then she never left. So that whole time they leave Seattle, it's just him in the body of the plane. And we don't know what he was doing, what he was thinking, what else transcribed in that, time period between takeoff and then the jump. All the pilots know is that they felt a bump around, I forget what time exactly it was, 8:10 or something like that, which would have been, similar to like when someone goes off a diving board at a pool. You kind of feel that vibration of the kickback. And yeah, that's really like the only concrete, thing we know about it, is that that's about when he jumped. But what he did up until that point, did he throw the bomb out? Did he jump with the bomb? Who knows?
And that's really interesting too, because of the fact that the flight attendant didn't feel comfortable back there, and the fact that she goes up into the cockpit, as you said, like, no one's keeping an eye on what he's up to. Is he messing with the parachutes back there, trying to set some as decoys? Like, nobody really knows what he's up to, and no one actually sees him jump, right? Like, the pilots have said they couldn't see because it's dark, but they couldn't see a parachute open. They saw nothing.
Yeah, no, and of course on an airplane, there's no rear view, side view mirrors or anything like that.
Right.
So you have no idea what's going to happen in the back of your plane. But they did think that, they thoroughly searched the plane in case he did happen to try and fake it. There was no way that he landed in Reno, like hiding under a seat and then kind of scampered out and or dressed like security guard or something like crazy and cockamamie like that. No way. Like, he definitely jumped off that plane.
Wow. So he jumps. The plane lands. Obviously, they're reporting descriptions and as much detail as they can to law enforcement. At this point, where does law enforcement begin the search? Because obviously they're trying to go after this guy. They've recorded all the serial numbers on the money that was given to him, and taken all these precautions. So where do they begin the search at that point?
I think they just start right out there in the woods. Like, they look at a map. They don't have an exact flight path, but these pilots, like, they've been doing this, pre-technology. This is 1971, so I would trust that they had like a decent idea of where they were. This is a route that they have probably flown many times. So they go based off this hand-drawn map and just kind of fan out. It's FBI, it's state, it's sheriff, it's local police, it's volunteers, it's like anybody that, they can get their hands on. And there's also the possibility of a reward almost instantly. So I think they were giving away $15,000 right away. It was like, if you find this guy or the money. So, and $15,000 is a lot of money today. So $15,000 in 1971 that's a nice chunk of change.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to note too, that the FBI was, the law enforcement agency involved, because this is a hijacking of an airplane. So this is a federal offense.
Yep. I think they looped the FBI in right away, just because, back then too, hijacking was so commonplace that there was like, probably there was a protocol to it. It was like, oh, okay, we're being hijacked today, call the FBI. It wasn't like this panic, I think. It was just so common for these criminals to hijack planes and try to get to Cuba around then. So he actually says to the flight attendant, don't worry, we're not going to Havana at one point.
Wow.
Yeah, just so casual, right? Like something just out of a movie.
That's so great. So, and he does leave some evidence behind.
Yes.
Is my understanding. He leaves like his tie and what else behind?
So he takes the tie off, clip-on tie, right? Like, how uncool is that? Clip-on tie, and then there were cigarette butts in the ashtray of the plane, which used to be right in the chair there. And then hairs, but they're not conclusive if these human hairs are actually his or not. Like we said earlier, this was like a commuter flight, so these planes had quick turnaround times. And then in the evening, the night before Thanksgiving, like there's a lot of people coming and going off that airplane throughout the day. So it could be his hair, could be someone else's. That's why none of the DNA evidence has ever been conclusive. They also found some fingertips or fingerprints, not fingertips, fingerprints that were left on he left his ticket on the plane too.
And maybe this is wrong. I swear I remember seeing this on a show at some point, but didn't he also order a drink or something while he was on the flight as well?
First thing he did, yeah. As soon as he got on, he ordered a bourbon and soda. And then gave his demands. Like he had his demands written on a note and kind of handed it to the stewardess as she handed him his drink.
That's insane.
Which is so
obviously, yeah. I mean, he seemed pretty calm, cool, and collected. Like he wasn't a first-time criminal, and we'll get to obviously like suspects and things like that. But obviously, in the era before DNA testing and things like that. Did they keep any of this evidence behind? Did they keep the cigarette butts? Did they keep the glass? Did they keep the tie?
Oh, so they have the tie. They do have that. The cigarette butts, I think, were lost in transport somewhere, or just kind of, they were collected, and then maybe back then they didn't think they were that important. because they probably didn't have the foresight to think, oh, maybe there's, remnants of saliva DNA and who knows. But yeah, so I think today they have the tie, they have the parachute that he left on the plane because he cut one of the parachutes up for the cord. And I think that might be about it. I think, the hair samples and stuff like that have been lost. Oh, and they have the ticket. Of course, they have the ticket.
Yeah. So what about the tie had some sort of particles or there was something they discovered on the tie, right?
Yeah.
What was that about? And have they made any headway with that at all?
Not really. It's led to theories, of course. So yeah, they were like titanium fragments or something like that, some kind of rare metal were on the tie. So it led some people to believe that maybe he worked at Boeing, leading again to the theory about familiarity with the plane and jumping out of the plane, but maybe not actually having ever done it. This was a guy that maybe he read and planned the heck out of this mission or heist, whatever you want to call it, but had never actually done anything like it, but was just so mentally prepared that he was, ready to go through it. So one of the theories is maybe he's an executive or a foreman at the Boeing plant, and that could explain why these little particles of metal were in the tie, how he knew about the door. The regular passenger doesn't know the ins and outs of a plane. I don't know where the doors are on the last plane I was on,
Right.
But he had this immense familiarity with the aircraft. So he had definitely studied on it. Maybe he worked with aircraft. Who knows? But yeah, one of the theories is that came from some sort of a metal fabrication plant or something along those lines.
So that seems like sort of a helpful clue, or at least a place for law enforcement to start. And then I know there were also some theories about potentially maybe a military background. So what were some of the initial leads that the FBI followed?
Yeah, definitely. So the Boeing 727 was used in Vietnam, which was the height of the Vietnam War was right around this time too. So they were looking at vets and people that had used it, and some of their suspects. One in particular, I forget his first name. His last name was Christensen, Kevin or Ken or something like that, Christensen. And he was a flight attendant for Northwest Airlines out of Minneapolis, and a baggage handler or something like that. So in Vietnam, he had worked on the 727s, kind of throwing packages out the back of the plane with the stairs down while it was flying. And he's a very compelling suspect, but there's a lot of evidence against him too, no way to place him in the Pacific Northwest at the time of the incident. I think one of the big factors was he had $200,000 in his bank account when he died, but they found out that he had just made investments and saved, and the money all came from legitimate sources. It wasn't this stolen marked money.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things, too, that's interesting is that, to their knowledge, none of this money that was stolen was ever actually spent, right? So it kind of leans towards the idea that maybe either he knew he couldn't spend it and survived, or just did not survive the landing.
Yeah. I mean, you would think that if he was, prepared enough to pull this off, that he would have used the money for something. He wouldn't have just done it, buried it, and called it a day, just to, commit this crime to see if he could do it. That seems like too outlandish for me. I think...
absolutely.
You wouldn't just do this for fun, right before Thanksgiving.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and so, speaking of the money, so fast forward almost 10 years, 1980, there's a young boy who's in the woods, and he recovers a portion of what they later found out was, part of the money. Yeah. They were able to match serial numbers, and it kind of deteriorated. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, talk about the coincidence to end all coincidences, right? Like, he's out with his family. He's this 8-year-old kid. It goes to build a campfire to cook hot dogs or something, and just kind of brushes the sand aside of his hand, and there it is. Like, he didn't really dig for it. It's not like he, was out there looking for it. Like, just through pure happenstance, found $5,800 sitting in the sand. As an 8-year-old kid, it's like, something out of a Spielberg movie. Like, you found this pirate's treasure or whatever.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So they find the money at Tina Bar, which is this location off the Columbia River, and they go and they dig and they search for more, and of course they come up empty. So we have these $5,800 that they found, but the rest of it is just vanished, gone. Could be sitting out there. I mean, if it's still out there in the woods, it's long deteriorated by now, because we saw how, some of those bills were more than half gone, and this would have only been 8 or 9 years in between the hijacking and the find. So now, tack on, we're approaching like 50 years now. Like that money would have been turned back into dirt, I think, by now.
Yeah. So what are some of the theories around the money that was located, though? Because it is kind of interesting that they found a portion of it, and one would think that, if they searched the surrounding area, that, eventually they would recover the rest of it if it's indeed there. What are some of the theories they had?
Well, so the two, one is that the money landed in the Columbia River, and that during this dredging operation, it somehow wound up tossed back up on shore. But that has kind of been debunked by the fact that, if it had been there pre-dredging, it would have been several feet underground. And if it happened during the dredging, like, there's a very slim chance that paper money would survive the dredging process. Like, when you dredge a riverbed, you use this cutter that cuts up the soil, and then it sucks it up through a tube, and then it goes through an impeller and goes back out through a discharge. So a wad of paper money that's soaking wet would probably it'd be like, putting something in a blender. You're just blasting this to smithereens. And then, one of the curious ones, Dwayne Weber, one of the suspects, had been spotted out in Tina Bar. So that's, definitely an angle that I think investigators looked at, and they came up empty. But super strange that this guy, who happens to be a suspect, happened to be in this location around that time. Was he just messing with people, thinking, maybe somebody will find this someday? And did he bury the other stuff if he was in fact the culprit? Who knows? The inclusive DNA evidence doesn't line up with him, but again, it's inconclusive, so it could be there. It's certainly like a super compelling angle to this case.
Yeah, so talk about that a little bit. So based on the evidence that we do have, we've got eyewitness descriptions, we've got this infamous sketch of the suspect, we've got, potential fingerprints, we've got the tie, but beyond that, there's not a whole lot else beyond that. And so it's taken on this kind of mythological story now. And who are some of the suspects? Because over the past 50 years, there's certainly been a number of alleged deathbed confessions and family members and friends pointing fingers. So in your opinion, who are some of the best, 50 years later, who are still some of the best suspects for this?
Weber is definitely compelling because of that whole Tina Bar visit. I think my personal favorite, who it probably was not him because he was, so much more successful, was Richard McCoy. So McCoy pulled this stunt off like a year or 6 months or whatever after Cooper, got $500,000 and got away with it. And he was an experienced Green Beret in Vietnam. He had packed his own parachute suit, and he got a helmet. He hijacked a plane with a fake grenade and a gun, and just way more precise, and he actually got the money, jumped out, and they found him 2 days later. But he doesn't line up because he was only like 26. So you're not going to confuse a 26-year-old with somebody in their mid-40s.
Right.
Unless that 26-year-old has done some hard living. But it's pretty unlikely. And then it's interesting that there are two sketches, and these two sketches are pretty different. And that goes back to, when you're a kid playing the telephone game. 10 people witness one event. 10 people have 10 different stories about that event. And how do you know which one's correct, what to follow? And that's what's been so tricky for law enforcement, I think, with this case, is that, based off just, I don't know exactly where they came up with the sketch. Was that based off the flight attendant's description or a passenger on the plane's description, etc.? Who did it? Was it Seattle police? Was it FBI? I'm not positive. There's not like a whole lot of information about that, but they are pretty different. And some people do fit the description when you look at these photos of these suspects. Some people look like dead ringers for that composite sketch, and other people don't look like it at all. And you really can't trust those things, I guess,
Right.
I'm actually working on a book now about the Isabella Stewart Gardner case. And in that one, they had, sketches of these thieves, and the person who was a security guard from the museum who provided the description for the sketch was just like, this is terrible. So if your one witness doesn't think the sketch looks like the guy, what's going to happen when you have 30 plus people giving input? I mean, being a sketch artist has got to be probably one of the hardest jobs. As someone who's an illustrator and an artist, I don't know how they do it. It's definitely an interesting and unique skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that with other cases too. There's a couple different sketches for even like the Zodiac, where same thing, certain people, certain suspects over time just nail it.
Yeah,
they look exactly like, and other ones are like,
between
nope.
height and weight and appearance and
hair color.
It's crazy.
And that obviously makes it, tremendously difficult, over the period of time. But it seems though that one of the good byproducts of time kind of going by is that we have been able to at least eliminate, it seems, some of the initial suspects and kind of maybe narrow the list down a little bit at least.
Yeah. I think most of them, at least that I've read about, have kind of been eliminated. Every once in a while a new story pops up, but I feel like with time they just get more and more outlandish and more far-fetched than what they could be. I think, there was the FBI agent most recently on the case. Wow, what was his name? I'm forgetting his name. Agent Carr. Larry Carr. So he came up with the theory that Cooper was perhaps Canadian, and specifically French Canadian, based on, they found this old comic book called Dan Cooper that was a French comic that had never been translated into English, and he was a paratrooper in the Royal Navy. And then the flight attendants have noted that the man had like no distinguishable accent whatsoever, which is common for that kind of French Canadian region of Montreal, Quebec. So, I mean, I think that's a plausible route. Someone that kind of just went to another part of the country, other side of the continent, and pulled off this crime and then went back and maybe lived to tell about it and didn't spend the money for whatever reason. Who knows? But that's certainly a very plausible idea, because a lot of the people that were initial suspects, these are like ex-cons and military guys, and just little things just didn't add up. Like, why would Richard McCoy, who was an Army Ranger in his 20s, have these metal particles in his plane and in his tie? It just doesn't add up. So I don't know.
Yeah. That I have heard that theory. That's really interesting. Some of the details, because it kind of goes back to why specifically did he choose that name? Yeah. Which, by the way, Dan Cooper was actually what he put on the registry, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't DB. It was kind of a media
media
screw up that
that they just ran with. And you know how that happens. Like the media, it'll spread like wildfire. So they just kind of took DB Cooper and then try and correct that now. Oh no, it's actually Dan Cooper. Like, no, he's DB Cooper for the rest of existence.
That's kind of a big detail though, right? Like, if you're trying to investigate and solve this mystery, it's like, if it's actually Dan Cooper, then that's kind of the lead we should be following. Like, why? Is there a significance behind why he chose that particular alias? And kind of following that thread.
I mean, it's crazy that, like, like you're saying, like, that is a big mess up. And Carr came up with that theory. That was maybe the early 2000s that he made that connection between the French comic and the name Dan Cooper. Like, they weren't looking into that in 1971, 72, which, I don't know. Maybe it could have led to something back then. But now, all those kind of leads are dried up. I think there was one of the suspects, I forget his name, but the daughter or the niece, like, swears she remembers seeing this comic, like, on his wall or something. But again, like, a child's memory can be pretty distorted over time.
Yeah. So, like, kind of my last question is, here we are, 2021. This is for the longest time been one of the most fascinating unsolved mysteries, and it's still to this day the only act of air piracy that's gone unsolved.
Yes.
Have they made any progress, or are we still kind of in the same place we were back in 1971?
I think we're in the same place. Like I said, every few years there's a new theory, new article that comes out, but with time they just get more and more far-fetched. And this, I mean, if he was alive, this guy's in like his mid-90s now. So he's probably not telling anybody unless he's on his deathbed. And then again, you get into the whole thing, like, you can't trust these deathbed confessions. It's such a strange phenomenon that people will confess to crimes that they never committed. I tried to research that a little bit, and that's opening up a whole other wormhole, and you need to get into the whole psyche of it all. It's just such a weird thing that someone thinks, like, oh, I'm dying, I should, I killed John Benet Ramsey or whatever, like, crime they're going to come up with. Like, it's just so random and bizarre. Like, why do that to yourself, and why do that to your family, your loved ones? Like, why confess to these crimes that you have literally nothing to do with? It's just so bizarre.
Yeah, that is a very strange psychological phenomenon. But, and as you said, there are multiple people who have allegedly had these deathbed confessions.
Yeah.
So then it becomes a situation where the waters are so muddied. Like, who do you believe? And then it also comes back to evidence. Like, a lot of these guys who confessed, were in different places, or could not have done it.
Yeah, and the fact that it was, right before the holiday, it's kind of like most people can pinpoint, you'd remember, Uncle John wasn't at Thanksgiving that year. You could remember that.
Right.
Like, everyone had, like, a place to be on that next day for the most part. And nobody was reported missing. Nobody didn't show up for Thanksgiving dinner that should have. Even McCoy, who was, like, such a great suspect, he was at Thanksgiving in Utah, so it wasn't him. There's no way he gets from the middle of, the Washington-Oregon forest to Utah in time for dinner the next day.
Right. So what's your personal feeling? Do you think he was killed in the jump, or do you think he survived and just, lived out the rest of his life?
I think it's not the most fun answer, but yeah, I think, at some point he landed in some water, and all rivers kind of drained to the ocean. And then once you're in the Pacific Ocean, you're gone. You're vanished. You're never coming back. That's what I think ultimately, because otherwise, like, there were so many eyes on the ground looking for this guy, looking for pieces of evidence. People still to this day go out and look for fragments of a parachute, and just to come up completely empty-handed is just, it just leads me to think that he disappeared. He's gone. Unless it's Loki, right? I don't know if you watched the Loki show last week.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, other than supernatural explanations, that's about where it lies.
Very good. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. Before I let you go, tell people where they can stay up on top of what you're up to and get a copy of the book.
Yeah, so Escape at 10,000 Feet, and it's the first installment in an Unsolved Case Files series, which is available pretty much wherever books are sold. We're going into a couple international markets soon. I think there's going to be a French translation and a Swedish translation, which is pretty cool. And then the next book in the series is about the escape from Alcatraz, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. That comes out in September. And then the third one about the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum comes out sometime in 2022. I'm not sure when. Well, I'm still writing that right now. And then beyond that, who knows? I'm hopeful to keep this thing going because it's a lot of fun just being able to spend a few months researching the heck out of these cases, and they're so interesting. And it's just been a blast. And you can find me online, thomasgsullivan.com. Website needs an update, but it's still there.
Beautiful. Well, we definitely have to have you back on for the second season to talk about Alcatraz. So
yeah, I would love to.
Anytime.
That would be a blast.
Awesome. And well, thank you so much, and really appreciate your time today.
All right. Thanks again, John. It's great to be here.
Just who was D.B. Cooper? Will we ever know the true identity of the man who 50 years later remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time? Did he survive the jump and live out the rest of his days as a free man, only to take the secret to his grave? Or did he perish in the jump, his body washed away, concealing the true fate of one of the most confounding crimes of modern times? Perhaps one day additional evidence will emerge, or science will provide an avenue to help crack the case. Only time will tell. I'll be back next week with a brand new mystery, and as always, thanks for listening to From the Void.